In November 1986, Luchese family boss Anthony Corallo sensed that the commission trial would result in a guilty verdict that would ensure the entire Luchese leadership would die in prison. Corallo, wanting to maintain the family's half-century tradition of a seamless transfer of power, called both Casso and Amuso to Fornari's Staten Island home. Casso turned down the promotion to boss, and instead suggested that Amuso become the new boss. Amuso formally took over the family in 1987, and Casso succeeded Fornari as consigliere. Casso later took over as underboss in 1989 after Mariano Macaluso retired. While at the top of the Luchese family, Amuso and Casso shared huge profits from their family's illegal activities. These profits included $15,000 to $20,000 a month from extorting Long Island delivery and carting companies, $75,000 a month in kickbacks from 8 air freight carriers operating in the New York area in exchange for guaranteed labor peace and no protests from workers over their low benefits, $20,000 a week in profits from illegal unlicensed video game machines set up in businesses with connections to the Luchese family, and $245,000 annually from a major family-owned concrete supplier. Amuso and Casso also split more than $200,000 per year from the Garment District Protection Rackets, as well as a cut of all the crimes committed by the family's soldiers. In one instance, Casso and Amuso split $800,000 from the Colombo family for Casso's aid in helping them rob steel from a construction site at the West Side Highway in Manhattan. In another instance, the two bosses received $600,000 from the Gambino family for allowing it to take over a Lucchese-protected contractor for a housing complex project on Coney Island. Casso also controlled Greek-American crime boss George Kalikatis, who gave Casso $683,000 protection money in 1990 alone to operate a loan sharking, extortion, and illegal gambling organization in Astoria, Queens. Casso had a close alliance with Russian boss Marat Balagula, who operated a multi-billion-dollar gasoline bootlegging scam in Brighton Beach. Balagula, a Soviet Jewish refugee from Odessa, had arrived in the U.S. under the Jackson-Vanik Amendment. After Colombo couple Michael Franzesi began shaking down his crew, Balagula approached Christopher Fornari, consigliere for the Luchese crime family, and asked for a sit-down at the 19th Hole Cruise Social Club in Brooklyn. According to Casso, Fornari declared, "Here there's enough for everybody to be happy, to leave the table satisfied. What we must avoid is trouble between us and the other families. I propose to make a deal with the others so there's no bad blood. Meanwhile, we will send word out that from now on you and your people are with the Luchese family. No one will bother you. If anyone does bother you, come to us and Anthony will take care of it." Street tax from Balagula's organization was not only strategically shared, but also became the five families' biggest moneymaker after drug trafficking. It didn't take long for word on the street to reach the Russian underworld. Marat Balagula was paying off the Italians. Balagula was a punk. Balagula had no balls. Balagula's days were numbered. This, of course, was the beginning of serious trouble. Balagula did in fact have balls. He was a ruthless killer when necessary. He also was a smart diplomatic administrator, and he knew that the combined, concerted force of the Italian crime families would quickly wipe the newly arrived Russian competition off the proverbial map. Shortly afterward, Balagula's rival, a fellow Russian immigrant named Vladimir Resnikov, drove up to the former's office building in the Midwood section of Brooklyn. Sitting in his car, Resnikov opened fire on the building with an AK-47. One of Balagula's close associates was killed and several secretaries were wounded. Then, on June 12, 1986, Resnikov entered the Rasputin nightclub in Brighton Beach and placed a 9mm Beretta against Balagula's head, demanding $600,000 in exchange for not pulling the trigger. He also demanded a percentage of everything Balagula was involved in. After Balagula promised to get the money, Resnikov threatened him and his family. Shortly after Resnikov left, Balagula suffered a massive heart attack. He insisted on being treated at his home in Brighton Beach, where he felt it would be harder for Resnikov to kill him. When Casso arrived, he listened to Balagula's story and seethed with fury. Casso later told Carlo that, to his mind, Resnikov had just spat in the face of the entire Cosa Nostra. Casso told Balagula, "Send word to Vladimir that you have his money, that he should come to the club tomorrow. We'll take care of the rest." Balagula responded, "You're sure? This is an animal. It was him that used a machine gun in the office." Casso responded, "Don't concern yourself. I promise we'll take care of him." Okay? Casso then requested a photograph of Resnikov and a description of his car. Following the meeting, Casso and Amuso received Furnari's permission to have Resnikov killed. The following day, Resnikov returned to the nightclub, expecting to pick up his money. Upon realizing that Balagula wasn't there, Resnikov launched into a barrage of profanity and stormed back to the parking lot. There, DeMeo crew veteran Joseph Testa walked up behind Resnikov and shot him dead. Testa then jumped into a car driven by Anthony Center and left Brighton Beach. According to Casso, after that, Marat didn't have any problems with other Russians. In 1988, Captain Paul Vario died in federal prison, and Amuso promoted Alphonse D'Arco to capo of the Vario crew. In 1990, Amuso selected D'Arco to organize a Luchese construction panel, a committee of Luchese family members. The panel would oversee the Luchese-controlled unions and construction companies and coordinate joint business ventures with the other 5 families. Many years later, D'Arco explained his role under Amuso and Casso's leadership of the Luchese family. "When a job needed to be done, whenever they needed to do something unpleasant to someone, I was the prick chosen by them." For example, in the infamous Whack Jersey order, Amuso and Casso ordered Al D'Arco and the Vario crew to murder the Luchese family's entire Jersey crew. After Captain Anthony Axaturo refused a direct order to increase the family's share of their profits. Axaturo was particularly enraged that Casso and Amuso also had ordered the assassination of his wife. Casso alleged during interviews with Philip Carlo that Axaturo had involved his wife in the running of the Jersey crew, and that therefore Axaturo alone was responsible for the contract put on her. Axaturo considered the contract on his wife a violation of the American Mafia's long-standing rule against killing mobsters' relatives who are not involved in the life, and he chose accordingly to break his blood oath and cooperate with the feds. In January 1991, Casso received an early warning from a secret law enforcement source he referred to as his crystal ball about an upcoming federal indictment. Shortly before he and Amuso both went into hiding, Casso summoned Alphonse D'Arco, the capo regime of the Vario crew, to a meeting at the Rodman Gun at John Paul Jones Park in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. Casso gave D'Arco a list of phone booth numbers and secret addresses and informed D'Arco that he was in charge of the Luchese crime family until further notice. D'Arco met with Casso and Amuso twice in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and several times at safe houses in Brooklyn. In early 1991, Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso ordered the murder of Made Man and Captain Peter Chiodo, a fellow Windows case defendant who had pleaded guilty without asking their permission. Casso assigned the murder to acting boss Alphonse Little Al D'Arco. The order shocked D'Arco, who knew that Chiodo had been a close friend and confidant of Casso for years. 2 Lucchese shooters ambushed Chiodo on May 8, 1991, while he was working on a car at a gas station in Staten Island. Chiodo received 12 bullet wounds in the arms, legs, and torso, but survived the attack. Doctors credited Chiodo's obesity with saving his life, as none of the slugs penetrated a vital organ or artery. However, he sustained several abdominal wounds and permanent damage to his right arm. Following the unsuccessful assassination attempt, Casso delivered a blunt threat through Chiodo's lawyer that, if Chiodo testified, his wife would be murdered. Despite being common practice in the Calabrian 'Ndrangheta, Casso's threat was a violation of a long-standing American mafia rule against killing mobsters' relatives who are not involved in the life. While Chiodo had angrily refused every previous offer to flip, Casso's threat to kill his wife was the last straw. He broke his blood oath and became a government witness, by his own account, to protect his family. Meanwhile, Alphonse D'Arco knew that Amuso and Casso blamed him for having failed to murder Peter Chiodo, and grew certain that they were planning to kill him. In July 1991, in a Staten Island meeting, Amuso and Casso replaced D'Arco as acting boss with a four-man panel of capos. While D'Arco was named to this panel, he remained certain that Amuso and Casso no longer trusted him. Due to a tip-off from an unidentified Luchese insider, Amuso was arrested on July 29, 1991, and Casso became the de facto boss of the family. It has been speculated that Casso himself was the source of the leak, as only a few people were privy to Amuso's location. This theory is contradicted by Carlo, who states that Casso was not only determined to find out who betrayed Amuso and kill them, but that Casso immediately sent the $250,000 that was due to Amuso to his wife in a shoebox. Casso, according to Carlo, had no desire to be boss of the Luchese family, and attempted to arrange for Amuso's escape from federal custody after his arrest. To the disappointment of Casso and the Luchese capos, Amuso refused to leave prison out of fear for his life. As a result, the Luchese capos asked Casso to take over as acting boss, and Gaspipe reluctantly accepted. By September 21, 1991, Alphonse D'Arco was certain that Amuso and Casso had marked him and his family for death. That afternoon, D'Arco telephoned the suburban Connecticut home of FBI agent Robert Marston. D'Arco explained that his life was in danger and that the Luchese family had started killing the entire families of suspected informers, which had never previously been allowed. After some hesitation, D'Arco told Agent Marston that he and his family were in hiding at his mother's house in Long Island. Later that night, D'Arco and his family entered the Witness Protection Program. The defections of both D'Arco and Chiodo opened the door for new murder indictments against Amuso and Casso. In a further violation of the Mafia's code, Chiodo's extended family in Brooklyn soon suffered retaliation from Amuso and Casso. On March 10, 1992, Vario crew enforcer Michael Spinelli shot Chiodo's sister, Patricia Capozzalo, while she was driving in Bensonhurst. Capozzalo sustained bullet wounds in the arm, back and neck, but survived. Also in '93, Casso ordered George Zappola, Frank Bones Papagni, and Luchese consigliere Frank Lastarino to murder the Luchese family's Bronx capo, Stephen Crea. Meanwhile, investigators from the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office were using new technology to trace the location of cell phones. Frank Lastarino, they found, was regularly calling a cell phone near Bud Lake, New Jersey. The DA's office informed FBI agent Richard Rudolph, who arranged for a federal warrant allowing Lastarino's phone to be tapped. As FBI agents listened in, they recognized Casso's voice. On January 19, 1993, Casso was arrested while coming out of the shower at the house he shared with his mistress, Rosemarie Bellotti, in Mount Olive, New Jersey. As FBI agents searched the house, they found a rifle, $340,000 in cash, a stack of FBI reports that had been provided to Amuso's defense attorneys, and meticulous paperwork about the inner workings of the Luchese family. The paperwork included monthly tabulations of how much money Casso and Amuso had received from each of their criminal operations. Casso had also written down a detailed list of the Christmas tribute money he and Amuso had received from each Luchese crew. There was also a neatly typed list of proposed made men, which was disguised as a list of wedding guests. Casso was held at New York's Metropolitan Correctional Center pending trial. Facing charges that would have all but assured he would die in prison, he continued ordering hits outside, but also began making escape plans. One plan almost succeeded when a bribed guard cleared him through security. Casso nearly walked out of jail, but was spotted by another guard and thwarted at the last minute. Afterwards, Casso began making plans for Luchese members to find out what prison buses would be transporting him and arrange an ambush, as well as assassinating the presiding judge, Eugene Nickerson. On February 2, 1993, the body of Frank Signorino, Peter Chiodo's uncle, was found frozen solid in the trunk of a car in East New York. Signorino had been slain by multiple gunshot wounds to the head, which was wrapped in a black plastic bag. On February 12, 1993, the Luchese family burned down the garage of Annette Signorino, Peter Chiodo's 95-year-old grandmother, in Gravesend, Brooklyn. Chiodo later told the FBI that he couldn't believe someone would try to harm an old woman. Casso's power came undone when Amuso stripped Casso of his title of underboss and declared that all Lucchese mafiosi should consider him a pariah, in effect, banishing Casso from the family. Amuso had long been suspicious of Casso's failure to use his law enforcement contacts to find out who had betrayed him, and finally concluded Casso did it himself to take control of the family. The two lead prosecutors on the case, Charles Rose and Gregory O'Connell, later told Jerry Capeci that they had hoped to use Sammy Gravano as a witness against Casso. Gravano refused, as he reportedly feared that Casso would start killing members of his extended family. Alphonse D. Arco, however, was reportedly very eager to testify against his former friend. According to FBI agent Lucien Gandolfo, he thought he was standing for what was right, but also for the old values that had been abandoned by the mob. Facing the prospect of a trial at which his mafia associates were due to be star witnesses against him, as well as spending the rest of his life in prison, Casso reached out to FBI agent Richard Rudolph and offered to turn informant. He was immediately moved to the federal prison at La Tuna, near El Paso, Texas, and housed in the famous Valachi suite as he debriefed. At the beginning of the first session, Gaspipe joked, "Every time I stepped out of the house, I committed a crime. You expect me to remember all of them?" The agents then urged Casso to start by revealing his crystal ball. In response, Casso disclosed that decorated NYPD detectives Stephen Caracappa and Luis Ippolito had been on his payroll and had committed 8 murders under his orders. Casso further explained that detectives Caracappa and Ippolito, who had also served on the Federal Organized Crime Strike Force, had also leaked the names of both police and FBI informants, which had resulted in many other murders. Federal prosecutors Charles Rose and Gregory O'Connell flew from New York City to Texas as the debriefing continued. Casso named scores of other mobsters he had conspired with, including Genovese boss Vincent Gigante. Casso also confessed to having sent hitmen to federal prosecutor Charles Rose's home with the intention of having him murdered. Casso also admitted to having plotted the assassination of federal judge Nickerson in order to delay his own trial. Casso initially confessed to 12 murders, but when pressed for details he admitted to a further 24. At the same time, Casso was found to have lied about how much money he possessed. He also denied all involvement in the murder of Peter Chiodo's uncle or in the arson at the home of Chiodo's elderly grandmother. Increasingly skeptical, the FBI agents made Casso take a lie detector test, which he failed. Gregory O'Connell later told Jerry Capeci that the decision not to use Casso as a witness was made in the Valachi suite, while Casso, with apparent delight, gleefully laughed as he described how he buried alive a young drug smuggling associate in the Florida Everglades. As Casso spoke, federal prosecutors O'Connell and Rose read each other's thoughts. The story would probably not go over well with a jury. Both prosecutors flew back to New York City, convinced that Casso's knowledge of mafia secrets did not matter. O'Connell later told Capeci, "It gets to a point where somebody is just too evil to put on the stand." Casso finalized a plea agreement at a hearing on March 1, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to 70 crimes, including racketeering, extortion, and 15 murders. The two lead prosecutors on the case, Charles Rose and Gregory O'Connell, later said they'd feared Casso could be acquitted at trial, since they did not have any taped conversations as evidence. However, with Casso's guilty plea, O'Connell said they had Casso tied up 6 ways to Sunday. While remaining in prison, Casso was placed in the Witness Protection Program. According to Carlo, when Casso revealed that he also had an FBI agent on the payroll, prosecutors ordered him to keep quiet. Casso alleges that he further enraged the government by accusing Gambino turncoat Sammy Gravano, who had denied ever having dealt in drugs, of buying large amounts of cocaine, heroin, and marijuana from Casso over 2 decades. However, Casso was vindicated to some extent when Gravano pleaded guilty to operating a massive narcotics ring, which included selling ecstasy to adolescents. He was the second confessed underboss of a New York crime family to break his blood oath and turn informer after Gravano. The Genovese crime family's New Jersey faction controlled organized crime activities within the state of New Jersey. The Jersey faction is divided into multiple crews, each led by a different captain, who oversees illegal criminal activities in labor racketeering, illegal gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. The Genovese crime family's New Jersey faction has maintained a strong presence in the northern Jersey area since the early Prohibition era. A number of powerful mobsters within the New Jersey faction, such as Guarino Willie Moretti, Gerardo Jerry Catena, and Louis Bobby Manna, have each held positions within the Genovese family's administration. From the 1990s until his death in 2010, Tino the Greek Fiumara was one of the most powerful capo regimes in the New Jersey faction. Early members of the New Jersey faction were under the control of New York City's Masseria family boss Joe Masseria. In January 1920, Prohibition began, and the United States government prohibited the sale of alcoholic beverages. With large illegal profits to gain, many members became bootleggers and were involved in smuggling large amounts of alcohol into New York's speakeasies. At the peak of Prohibition in 1930, violence erupted between the two rival New York City families. The violence became known as the Castellamarese War. Joe Masseria with his mafia family battled with Salvatore Maranzano, who was the boss of the Brooklyn-based Castellamarese clan, for control over all Italian gangs in the United States on April 15, 1931. Masseria was murdered and replaced as boss by Charles Lucky Luciano, who ended the war with Maranzano. The members of the Masseria New Jersey faction continued working for Luciano as bootleggers. After a few months, on September 10, 1931, Salvatore Maranzano was murdered, and Luciano became the most powerful mobster in America. Luciano decided to restructure all the American mafia families by establishing the commission instead of having a capo dei capi, or boss of all bosses. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the Luciano family's New Jersey faction expanded into other crimes. The most powerful capo regime in the faction was Guarino Willie Moretti, who controlled numerous illegal gambling operations in New Jersey. Moretti formed an alliance with Jewish mobster Abner Longy Zwillman, who the media refer as the Al Capone of New Jersey, because Zwillman had once controlled the majority of the illegal alcohol in Newark. The alliance between Moretti and Zwillman dominated illegal gambling in New Jersey. In early 1937, Newark family boss Gaspare D'Amico fled the U.S. after a foiled hit ordered by Joseph Profaci. The Mafia Commission divided up D'Amico's territory among the Luciano Boiardo crew, Galliano Jersey crew, Mangano, Bonanno, Badami family, Profaci and Philadelphia North Jersey crew families. In 1937, family boss Luciano was arrested, leaving Frank the Prime Minister Costello as the new acting boss of the family. Moretti, a cousin to Costello, was promoted to underboss. Zwillman continued to align with the Luciano family, while Moretti was replaced by Newark Capo Ruggiero Ricci the Boot Boiardo. Zwillman and Boiardo were previously enemies fighting for control of territory in Newark, but the two men put their differences aside and focused on controlling illegal gambling throughout Newark. The alliance between Moretti, Zwillman, and Boiardo continued to operate peacefully together for years, until Moretti became mentally ill in the early 1950s. A contract hit was put on Moretti, and he was executed while eating lunch on October 4, 1951. The murder of Moretti became a key factor in weakening Frank Costello's leadership position within the Luciano family, as his only major remaining supporter was Mangano family boss Albert Anastasia. A few years earlier in 1946, Costello's strongest ally and powerful mobster Lucky Luciano was deported into Italy. Costello promoted Vito Genovese to underboss, but Genovese believed the family belonged to him and plotted to take control from Costello. After his promotion to underboss, Genovese gained the support of Luchese boss Gaetano, Tommy Luchese, and Mangano underboss Carlo Gambino. In May 1957, Genovese and his allies ordered the assassination of Costello, but failed and only wounded him. The attack made Costello aware that Genovese would never stop, and Costello retired, leaving Genovese as the new boss. Under Genovese's leadership, Gerardo Jerry Catena was promoted to underboss of the family and also oversaw the New Jersey faction. Catena, an ally of Genovese, depended on Boiardo and Angelo De Carlo to help run the faction as his capos. In 1957, Genovese gathered the bosses of the top mafia families for his Appalachian Conference, which ended in the arrest of several bosses and the realization of a nationwide network of organized criminals. After the failed conference, Genovese was closely monitored by the government and arrested in 1959 on a heroin conviction. Zwillman hanged himself on February 27, 1959, upon being summoned to appear at the Valachi hearings. Most of Zwillman's illegal gambling rackets were taken over by members of the Jersey faction. According to the Valachi hearings, the upper administration of the Genovese family included acting boss Thomas Tommy Ryan Aboli, underboss Jerry Catena, and consigliere Michel Mike Miranda. Throughout the 1960s, Catena continued to work with the upper administration. Catena was born on January 8, 1902, in South Orange, New Jersey, to Francesco and Donata Speziale, and subsequently became familiar with legendary mobsters Guarino Willie Moretti, Thomas Greco, Cosmo Gus Frasca, and Abner Longy Zwillman. He was a vending machine racketeer with interests in People's Express Company, Advanced Vending Company, Runyon Vending Sales, and a few more, all based in Newark, New Jersey. Little is known of Catena in his early days of the Luciano crime family, but reportedly he was a soldier in the crew that became the powerful Genovese crew during the late 1920s, headed by later underboss Vito Genovese. As the time passed, and Lucky went to prison and later deportation in the 1940s, Vito organized the shooting of the boss of the Luciano crime family, Frank Costello, in 1957, which forced Costello to retire. Apparently, Catena is to have risen through the ranks, as he was listed as the underboss in the late 1950s, heading the New Jersey faction of the Genovese crime family under the leadership of Don Vito. Later, it has been confirmed that he moved to New York City to join the forces of Charlie Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky during the early 1920s, when the rise of two mafia dons, Joe the Boss and Salvatore Maranzano, began fighting a bloody internal battle called the Castellamarese War. After the imprisonment of Vito Genovese in 1959, a committee ruling panel was to run the Genovese crime family, which consisted of Catena, Philip Benny Squint Lombardo, Thomas Eboli, who was murdered in 1972, and Michel Miranda. This administration continued to run the family throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. Gerardo Catena was incarcerated at the Yardville State Prison, now the Garden State Youth Correctional Facility, from 1970 to 1975, because he had refused to testify before the New Jersey State Commission of Investigation. After his incarceration, he was allegedly semi-retired due to illness, and became officially retired after his release in 1975, as he moved to Boca Raton, Florida that same year. Gerardo Catena died of natural causes on April 23, 2000, at the age of 98. Ruggiero Boiardo, also known as the Boot, was an Italian-American mobster and powerful capo regime in the New Jersey faction of the Genovese crime family. He was named capo after Willie Moretti was promoted to the position of underboss by Frank Costello. Richie the Boot ruled the greater Newark and North Jersey gang territories for over 3 decades. The Boot, a nickname which he developed in his youth, had been said to have derived from the heavy-footed way he disposed of his gangland foes. In the early 1930s, Boiardo was ambushed and seriously wounded with 12 buckshot pellet wounds. He survived. At the time, the press suspected Abner Zwillman was responsible, but later evidence pointed to the members of another rival gang led by the Mazzocchi brothers, whom the Boot subsequently had murdered. None of Richie's gang is above suspicion of planning the murder of their leader, the Newark Evening News reported. There is also said to be men who wanted to see Richie out of the way because of certain women who favored him with their regard. Other likely suspects included the Mazzocchi brothers, Willie Moretti, and even his close friend Al Capone. The number one suspect, however, was Abner Longies Willman, a man sometimes referred to as Gangster Number 2. When the Boots' .38 caliber revolver fell to the hospital floor after the attempt on his life, prosecutors had a case against him. It was an unusual one that appeared to be putting the victim of a crime on trial, rather than the perpetrators. The men who tried to assassinate the Boot were never found, at least by the authorities. The police were convinced the Boot knew who was behind the shooting. In his hospital room, they gave the seriously wounded gangster descriptions of the men who had allegedly shot at him, but the Boot shrugged and said he did not know. In the 1930s, Boiardo became a made man, or full member of the Luciano crime family established by Lucky Luciano. In 1957, this family became the Genovese family under boss Vito Genovese. With Abe Willman's death in 1959, Boiardo became the undisputed mob boss of Newark, who also owned residences in Cuba and Florida, where he had major gambling interests. In April 1969, Richie Boiardo was convicted of conspiracy to violate gambling laws. Accordingly, he was sentenced to 2.5 to 3 years in state prison and fined $1,000. He was incarcerated on November 18, 1970, at the New Jersey State Prison, Leesburg, New Jersey. The Boiardo family's association with Newark's mayor, Hugh Adonisio, led to Adonisio's conviction in 1969 on racketeering charges. This eliminated Adonisio as a contender to become the next governor of the state of New Jersey. Adonisio was sentenced to 10 years and served 5 years and 2 months in a federal prison. The same federal grand jury that returned an indictment against Adonisio also indicted 14 others, including Richie Boiardo's son Anthony Boiardo, also known as Tony Boy Boiardo. The younger Boiardo is believed to have been in control of the Newark underworld at the time. During the criminal proceedings, Tony Boy suffered a heart attack. He was never found by the courts to be healthy enough to stand trial on his extortion and conspiracy charges. Boiardo died of natural causes on October 29, 1984, aged 93, and was interred at Holy Cross Cemetery in North Arlington, New Jersey. His son, Anthony Tony Boy Boiardo, was also involved in organized crime. At the time of Anthony's death, he was awaiting trial on an indictment that had resulted in the conviction of Mayor of Newark, Hugh Joseph Adonisio. Philip Lombardo was the boss of the Genovese crime family from the late 1960s until the beginning of the 1980s. He succeeded Vito Genovese as boss in 1969 and was succeeded by Vincent Gigante in 1981. He began his career as a soldier on Michael Trigger, Mike Coppola's powerful 116th Street crew in the East Harlem section of New York. During the 1940s, Lombardo served a brief prison stretch for narcotics trafficking, his only imprisonment. Due to his thick eyeglasses, he earned the nickname Benny Squint. In 1959, family boss Vito Genovese was sent to prison. However, Genovese used a series of acting bosses to maintain control of the family from prison. His 3 acting bosses, or ruling panel, were Capo Michel Miranda, underboss Gerardo Jerry Catena, and acting boss Thomas Tommy Ryan Eboli. The trio panel was known to authorities, but in 1962, former mobster turned government witness Joseph Valachi stated before a U.S. Senate subcommittee that Lombardo was also a part of this same panel. In that same year, Anthony Strollo disappeared and was presumed murdered. Strollo's role as a front or acting boss was given to Thomas Eboli. Eboli himself was later gunned down in 1972. It had been theorized that Commission Chairman Carlo Gambino had orchestrated Eboli's murder in order to install his own candidate for Genovese boss in the form of Funzi Tieri, who would replace Eboli as front boss shortly after Eboli's murder. However, according to FBI informant Vincent Cafaro, Lombardo had been boss since 1969 and had been using Eboli and Tieri as decoys to insulate himself from the FBI. In 1981, Tieri died, and Lombardo stepped down as boss due to poor health, naming Vincent Gigante as his successor, while at the same time making Anthony Fat Tony Salerno the new front boss in order to disguise Gigante's transition into the new boss. This way, the FBI would still not know who was really in charge and would continue to go after the wrong people, which they did, sentencing Salerno to 100 years in prison in 1986 in the Mafia Commission trial. Although Lombardo resided in Englewood, New Jersey, he spent his remaining winters in Hollywood, Florida. He made it clear that Gigante was to become the new boss, and Salerno would continue as the front boss. He was 78 years old and living in Florida when he died on April 29, 1987. In 1972, after the murder of Genovese acting boss Thomas Eboli, Tieri became the boss of the Genovese family. At that time, it was speculated that Gambino crime family boss Carlo Gambino had ordered Eboli's murder because Eboli owed him $4 million. According to this theory, Gambino wanted Tieri to be the boss of the Genovese family. However, most experts now believe that he was merely a front for the family's actual boss, Philip Lombardo. Luigi Angelo Martino, the architect for money laundering for the Genovese family, served directly under him. Funzi was considered a low-profile and diplomatic mobster, a good earner for the family who believed in sharing wealth with his soldiers and captains. He was convicted of armed robbery when he was aged 20, but avoided further indictments until the end of his life. Given that Funzi Tieri was a front boss, it is unknown how much power Lombardo allowed him. However, Tieri did have a reputation as an orderly and smart manager who used violence only as a last resort. In 1980, Frank played a key role in the assassination of Philadelphia crime family boss Angelo Bruno and the opening of Atlantic City, New Jersey to the New York crime families. The state of New Jersey had announced the introduction of legal casino gambling in Atlantic City, and the New York families wanted to open operations there. However, Atlantic City belonged to the Philadelphia family and Bruno wasn't willing to share it. In March 1980, Tieri sent a message to Philadelphia's consigliere, Antonio Caponigro, that the Mafia Commission would support him as boss if he assassinated Bruno. What Caponigro didn't know was that the commission had no intention of sanctioning Bruno's murder. On March 21, 1980, Bruno was murdered in his car on a Philadelphia street. The commission immediately summoned Caponigro to New York for a meeting. 2 weeks later, his body was discovered in New York with $20 bills stuffed in his orifices. However, the New York families did achieve access to Atlantic City. Federal prosecutors eventually charged Tieri with being the head of a crime family that was involved in racketeering, extortion, and illegal gambling. On January 23, 1981, the ailing Tieri, using a wheelchair and an oxygen tank, was convicted of violating the RICO Act. At the sentencing, his lawyers argued for leniency, saying that he was dying. Prosecutors told the judge it was an act, and the judge sent him to prison for 10 years. Anthony Provenzano became one of the most powerful capos in New Jersey, with his connection to Teamsters union leader Jimmy Hoffa. Provenzano served as vice president of the IBT's Union City branch during the 1950s. In that office, Provenzano was able to embezzle money from the union's pension fund, receive kickbacks from construction companies to work on sites, and use his title as a legitimate source of income. He was born on May 7, 1917, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, the fourth of 6 children to Sicilian immigrants, Rosario and Josephine Provenzano. At age 15, he quit public school and went to work as a $10 a week helper at the H.P. Welch Trucking Company. 3 years later, he became a driver. Provenzano became employed by Teamsters Local 560 in Union City, New Jersey, as a business agent between 1948 and 1958, as the president between 1958 and May 1966, and as secretary-treasurer between November 24, 1975 and June 1978. Provenzano was a resident of Clifton, New Jersey and Hallandale, Florida. In 1959, Provenzano cited the Fifth Amendment 44 times before a Senate racketeering committee, for which Robert F. Kennedy was counsel. In June 1961, Teamsters Local 560 Secretary-Treasurer Anthony Castellito traveled to upstate New York to meet with Salvatore Briguglio, a mob-associated loan shark. According to federal government reports, Briguglio and Harold Königsberg murdered Castellito. Subsequently, in August 1961, Provenzano's brother Sal was appointed to the position of trustee. Formerly occupied by Castellito, Briguglio was appointed to the position of business agent in September 1961. Provenzano's other brother Nunzio was appointed to the position of business agent in February 1963. On November 15, 1960, Provenzano was indicted in the District of New Jersey for extortion for the demand and receipt of labor peace payoffs from the Dorn Transportation Company between 1952 and 1959. On July 12, 1963, Provenzano was convicted of extortion and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. He served 4.5 years, incarcerated between May 1966 and 1970. Although Provenzano had once been a friend of Teamsters Union director Jimmy Hoffa, he had since become an enemy after a reported feud when both were in federal prison at United States Penitentiary, Lewisburg in Pennsylvania, in the 1960s. Hoffa planned to regain the leadership of the union, but was met with opposition from several members of the mafia. In 1973 and 1974, Hoffa asked Provenzano for his support to regain his former position, but he refused and threatened Hoffa by reportedly saying he would pull out his guts and kidnap his grandchildren. At least 2 of his union opponents had been murdered, and others who had spoken out against him had been assaulted. On July 30, 1975, Hoffa was to meet Provenzano and Anthony Giacalone at 2 p.m. at the Marcus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township, a Detroit suburb. Hoffa was never seen again. Giacalone and Provenzano, who denied having scheduled a meeting with Hoffa, were found not to have been near the restaurant that afternoon. While one account cited by Times states that Provenzano was seen fraternizing with local union members in Hoboken, New Jersey, according to the Associated Press. Provenzano told investigators that he was playing cards with Stephen Andretta, Thomas Andretta's brother, in Union City, which borders Hoboken, on the afternoon that Hoffa disappeared. 10 weeks after Hoffa's disappearance, President Richard Nixon made his first public appearance since his resignation, during which he golfed with Frank Fitzsimmons, president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and Provenzano. On December 4, 1975, a federal investigator in Detroit said in a court hearing, presided over by James Paul Churchill, that a witness had identified 3 New Jersey men who had participated in the abduction and murder of Hoffa. The 3 men, close associates of Provenzano, were Salvatore Briguglio, his brother Gabriel Briguglio, and Thomas Andretta. Provenzano was indicted in the Southern District of New York, along with Anthony Bentro and Lawrence Palladino, for conspiracy to violate the anti-kickback statute for a proposed $2.3 million pension fund loan from the Utica Teamsters Benefit Fund for the renovation of the Woodstock Hotel. In July 1978, he was convicted of these charges and sentenced to 4 years in prison. On June 23, 1976, Provenzano was indicted in Ulster County, New York, along with Briguglio and Konigsberg, on charges of conspiracy and murder in connection to the death of Anthony Castellito. On June 14, 1978, Provenzano was convicted of murder, while the conspiracy to commit murder count was dismissed, and was sentenced to life imprisonment in Kingston, New York, exactly 1 week later. In February of 1979, Provenzano was indicted in the District of New Jersey, along with Gabriel Briguglio, Stephen and Thomas Andretta, and Ralph Pilecchia on RICO charges in the C-Train labor peace payoffs case. On May 25, 1979, he was convicted of these charges, and on July 10, 1979, he was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. In the early 1980s, Vincent the Chin Gigante became the Genovese family's new boss and promoted powerful New Jersey mobster Louis Bobby Manna to consigliere. Manna would oversee the New Jersey factions with help from his top aide Lawrence Dendico. Manna rented an apartment in Greenwich Village, New York to be close to Gigante's headquarters at the Triangle Social Club. However, Manna's power base was in New Jersey. He is the brother-in-law of Genovese crime family mob associate Gerald Durazzo. He supervised 4 capo regimes while also serving as consigliere. He ran his personal criminal operations out of an Italian eatery called Casella's at 615 First Street in Hoboken, New Jersey. Manna became the lead man for the Genovese family in discussions with the Gambino crime family on how to equitably divide up that area. In 1987, Manna began pushing the Genovese family to murder John Gotti, the new boss of the Gambino family, a Gambino capo. Gotti had arranged the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in 1985 and taken control of the Gambino family without the approval of the commission. Manna was especially unhappy about Gotti's unsanctioned coup against Castellano. In addition, Gotti wanted to take the lucrative South Jersey holdings that used to belong to the Philadelphia crime family and leave the less desirable North Jersey territory to the Genovese family. Between August 1987 and January 1988, the Federal Bureau of Investigation recorded 12 conversations in which Manna and other Genovese mobsters discussed murdering John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and New York contractor Irwin Schiff. While discussing the John Gotti murder, Manna advised the hitman to wear a disguise as the target area was fairly open. On August 8, 1987, Schiff was shot in the head while dining in a Manhattan restaurant. Manna was later indicted, and on June 26, 1989, Manna was convicted of conspiring to murder John Gotti, Gene Gotti, and Irwin Schiff in aid of racketeering. On September 26, 1989, Judge Mary Ann Trump Barry sentenced Manna to 80 years in federal prison. It was revealed by the FBI in 2004 that prior to Manna's sentencing, he was involved in a murder plot of Judge Mary Ann Trump Barry, the United States Attorney Samuel Alito, and Chief Prosecutor Michael Chertoff. In December 2020, the 91-year-old Manna requested compassionate release, but was denied. He was denied release again in November 2021. In the mid-1970s, Tino the Greek Fiumara began representing many of the Genovese family's interests on the New Jersey waterfront. After years of working under Capo regime Peter La Placa, Fiumara worked closely with Genovese family street boss Frank Funzi Tieri, who controlled all of the family's northern New Jersey waterfront rackets. He also maintained a working relationship with Luchese Jersey captain Anthony Axaturo. Fiumara gained control of the ILA by paying off Thomas Buzanka, the president of ILA local members in Brooklyn and New Jersey. The connection to Buzanka allowed Fiumara to control Anthony Scotto, the ILA boss of Brooklyn docks. Fiumara's power continued to grow on New Jersey waterfront with the help of Michael Coppola, Michael Borelli, and Joseph Dotto Jr. By the mid-1970s, his crew controlled many of the Genovese union and labor rackets on the New Jersey waterfront. Fiumara's crew also cooperated in illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and narcotics rackets with Lucchese crime family captain Anthony Axaturo. One of his biggest rivals was Genovese crime mobster John DiGilio, a powerful figure on the Bayonne waterfront, and one of his strongest allies in New Jersey was Genovese mobster Lawrence Dentico. During the 1950s, Dentico worked for boss Vito Genovese. In 1957, authorities suspected that Dentico provided the murder weapon and getaway car in the shooting death of mobster Johnny Earl. In 1966, Dentico was arrested for loan sharking and extortion rackets in Hoboken, New Jersey. When Vincent the Chin Gigante became family boss in 1981, Dentico was working as a top aide in New Jersey to Luis Manna, the former consigliere. In 1981, Dentico was convicted of fraud and conspiracy involving the bribing of officials in Union City, New Jersey, to rig bids on public construction contracts, and served a 6-year prison sentence. After Gigante went to prison for racketeering in 1997, Dentico and Genovese mobster Frank Iliano formed a 2-man ruling panel of street bosses to operate the family. In August 2005, Dentico and other Genovese mobsters were indicted on charges of extortion, conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit murder. The defendants were accused of participating in loan sharking, sports bookmaking, numbers running, and football ticket gambling. He pleaded guilty, and on August 16, 2006, was sentenced to 51 months in prison. On May 12, 2009, he was released from prison. However, in 1979, Tino Fiumara was convicted of labor racketeering and federal extortion in Newark and Manhattan, and sentenced to 15 years in prison. While in prison, he continued to control the New Jersey crew. Different Fiumara crew members, such as Genovese soldier Michael Mikey Cigars Coppola, assisted Fiumara in running the day-to-day operations, while Fiumara gave orders through messengers and underlings who frequently visited him in prison. In February 1994, he was released from prison and quickly assumed control of the New Jersey faction. Fiumara's old rival, John DiGilio, was murdered by the Genovese family in 1988, the previous head of the New Jersey faction, Consigliere. Louis Bobby Manna was imprisoned in 1989 for conspiracy to murder Gambino crime family boss John Gotti. Anthony Axachuro had been demoted by his boss and was in hiding. Tino was now completely in charge. By the mid-1990s, Tino Fiumara was recognized as a mafia powerhouse in New Jersey. In 1996, Coppola became a fugitive to avoid prosecution for a 1977 New Jersey murder. Fiumara and Coppola continued to communicate throughout the later part of the 1990s, as Coppola still played an active role in the leadership of the Fiumara crew. Coppola's reputation and close association with Fiumara allowed him to continue making money while in hiding. In April 1999, Fiumara was returned to prison on a parole violation. To meet with Genovese superiors and associates in New York City, Fiumara had been driven to the meetings hiding in car trunks. Fiumara was to be released in 2002. However, in 2003, Fiumara received another 8-month parole violation. Fiumara had been in contact with Coppola, still a fugitive, and failed to report the contact to law enforcement. On November 30, 2005, the body of Genovese mobster Lawrence Ricci was found in a car trunk in New Jersey. It was rumored that Fiumara approved Ricci's murder because he had refused to plead guilty in an ongoing racketeering trial. In 2009, the New York Times reported that former New Jersey federal prosecutor and New Jersey gubernatorial candidate Chris Christie was a step-nephew to Fiumara's older brother. Christie told the Times that he first learned about Fiumara at age 15 from a newspaper article. Christie said he met Fiumara once at a family gathering and another time at a Texas prison. Long before becoming a federal prosecutor in 2002, on November 3, 2009, Chris Christie was elected governor. As a known associate and supporter of longtime Genovese crime family boss Vincent Gigante, Fiumara had played an important role within the Genovese crime family's New Jersey faction for more than 30 years. For 15 years, Fiumara had been recognized as the head of the New Jersey Rackets for the Genovese crime family, and in the last several years he was seen as a future candidate for boss of the Genovese family. Up until his death, Fiumara was involved in New Jersey Rackets and was a power within the family.
You're listening to the Everything Network.